Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host GD and joining me today once again is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we'll be reviewing the ImolaGP, so let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant. I think this was the second last non-doubleheader weekend that we have in this year's calendar, and we were back in Imola. First race for Ferrari at home, and what a disaster! Such a disaster that I almost fell asleep. I was so disappointed in both Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely not the weekend Ferrari were hoping to have. Like, even if one car DNF'd or one car did not perform, it's fine. It's Ferrari. They can like manage that. But two cars not performing, not getting the result, basically, not getting the desired result at their home weekend. A race which is more home than Monza to Ferrari, basically. So
True,
yeah, it's it's a disaster.
but
Yeah, it's not what they wanted.
I mean, yeah, obviously, the issue was exaggerated by the fact that Charles Leclerc gave away P3 essentially in an attempt to overdo his driving while chasing Sergio Perez, and obviously Carlos Sainz can't catch a break, got unlucky with Daniel Ricciardo a little bit. Nothing he could have done there, although he could have had a better qualifying.
Yeah,
But whatever that might be, it seemed that Red Bull had the upper hand throughout the weekend, whether that was qualifying, whether that was the sprint, or even the race on Sunday. There was no touching Max Verstappen, and even Sergio Perez showed some great pace on Sunday. So, yeah, P3 was the best that I feel P3, P4 was the best Ferrari could hope for, and I think the biggest blow is in terms of constructors' points. Charles Leclerc is responsible for the points that he has in the Drivers' Championship. So there's no one else to blame for that. But I think Ferrari took a bigger blow in the constructors, similar to what happened to Red Bull, at
Bahrain. Yeah,
Bahrain with the double DNF, which is essentially what this weekend was for Ferrari. But I like the attitude that Mattia Binotto has. In his post-race press conferences and interviews, he said, we'll come back and be better. It's different from what we have heard before. Come out of the Ferrari paddock, the energy that comes, surrounding that garage. So it's nice to see that. What I'm hoping for is that obviously Charles Leclerc came out and said that he learned that in some circumstances it's better to take home the result at hand instead of chasing something that is out of your hands. But I'm hoping what Carlos Sainz can do is look back at his previous season. Not obviously it's hard to get over the disappointment of the last two weekends, but he's trained for this all his life. And what I'm hoping for is Carlos can look back at his previous season, with Ferrari, and look at how consistent he was and how his performance was basically a crescendo throughout the year, and he got better throughout the year. And I think that is what he needs to take some solace from, some confidence in, and come back uh, stronger, and just believe in his consistency and that he will naturally progress in that car as the season continues.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. Carlos Sainz needs that little bit of inspiration right now. That little bit of extra motivation right now, and try to avoid falling into that spiral, into that negative spiral. But I think from Charles Leclerc, although these were difficult conditions and he was pushing more than he should have, but I think for me, what this weekend has brought forward is that the Red Bull drivers are generally don't make mistakes. We saw that even last year, in that ultimate battle for both the championships. The Red Bull drivers did not make many mistakes, and right now we can see the Ferrari drivers making mistakes. And all right, Carlos Sainz has had two difficult weekends, and they may be outliers, but we know we know that Charles Leclerc can make those odd mistakes in high pressure situations, as we saw last year with Pierre Gasly, for example, in Austria. So it would be
Uh,
interesting to see how that goes, how Ferrari maintains that consistency, and yeah, it's going to be super important for both the drivers to perform at a consistent level than like the Red Bull drivers.
Absolutely, and people have come out and pointed out that Max Verstappen has finished first or second in all the races that he has finished, especially since last year, except that one outlier in
Hungary. Yeah.
Hungary, where he was caught out by Valtteri Bottas. So that goes to show at what level Max Verstappen is operating, and that is the level that Charles Leclerc has to match. With his consistency. Yes, Lewis Hamilton had a late season resurgence, and in part, Red Bull couldn't catch up with the development work that Mercedes did, or whatever Mercedes did in order to have that pace advantage towards the end of the season. But Charles Leclerc can't depend on that. He has to stay ahead or on par with Max Verstappen throughout the season, and the only way that's going to happen is if he's up there with Max Verstappen each and every race and makes the best of the Ferrari reliability compared to the reliability issues that Red Bull have. And if you were to ask me today, who has the better car, it seems that the general consensus in the paddock is that Ferrari has a better car because it works in all conditions, blah 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 blah. But if you were to ask me, it seems that the day Red Bull is not having a reliability issue, it is the best car on the grid.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
You look back at Bahrain and they had a reliability issue that day, and they were slower than the Ferrari. You look back at Australia, they had a reliability issue that then they couldn't touch the Ferrari. But if you look at Jeddah and if you look at Imola, they had no reliability issues and they were way ahead of the Ferrari. So clearly it seems that the Red Bull car is working much better. Now obviously this was a much shorter weekend, there wasn't enough free practice, so it could also happen that Red Bull just happened to get their setup right. It seemed that Red Bull also brought a bigger wing, and that maybe helped them with their tire deck, whereas Ferrari just couldn't get their setup right, which is why they had that graining phase during the sprint race, because of which Charles Leclerc lost out. And obviously little things during the feature race, like the start, there was something going on with his starting position on the grid. It was slippery because of some asphalt or something. But regardless of all of that, during the race, it just seemed that the Red Bull have had the upper hand whenever they have had a reliable car.
Yeah, absolutely. But now I think, Ferrari have not brought a single big upgrade since testing. Maria Binotto told us that we don't have any upgrades planned for the start of the season. And now that the sprint race is done, no one was going to bring any upgrades to Imola. And even in Miami, since it's a new circuit and it's a street circuit, I don't see any new upgrades coming. But we are soon going to Spain after Miami, so it's going to be interesting to see how that development work continues for Ferrari, because for every other team there has been every bits of development going on, and with Red Bull especially, but Ferrari have had the same car essentially since testing, so it's what is the next step for them. That is going to be key.
Yeah, and the result that we got on Sunday was at a track where, especially after Australia, everybody was saying that Ferrari will have the upper hand, and they clearly did not across the weekend. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Miami, they have that long back straight. So I'd say the Red Bull holds the upper hand there, and if the performance continues, if they don't have a reliability issue, I'll be surprised if Ferrari can keep up with them even next weekend. But obviously that is yet to come. But let's talk about what has been happening over the last 4 weekends, and that is our number 2 headline of this weekend, and that is Russell versus Hamilton. Now Hamilton hasn't got, people haven't come out against Hamilton as hard as they did when Sebastian Vettel failed at Ferrari, when Charles Leclerc joined, and maybe that is just a sign of people learning or whatever that may be. I don't know why that is the case. But clearly there is something going on in Mercedes where George Russell is being able to extract a lot more from the car than Lewis Hamilton is. And even before we get into the conversation about those two and the performance difference, I think that just goes to show that how hard it is for anyone in the paddock to get in, jump into a new car and make it work for them. And it goes to show what a tremendous job all these other drivers are doing, whether that is Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda especially, over the last couple of weekends. A 7-time world champion is genuinely struggling. And it's not, he's a couple places behind every race. He is 10 places behind. He's not able to get out of Q1. He's not able to do this, that, and the other, which the other car is doing. I wouldn't say easily, but much more consistently.
Absolutely. I think this is uh, everyone was contemplating in December and January that what this battle is going to be like, this intra-team battle, right? And it's a surprise for everyone to see Lewis Hamilton struggle, and it's a surprise for everyone to see Mercedes struggle. But when you have two drivers, whatever their skill level may be, but when you have two drivers with the same car and the pure pace difference is 10 places, so that is something which becomes interesting and which becomes, you know, whatever you may call. But Lewis Hamilton definitely has work to do. Like Mercedes has their own work to do to solve porpoising and to solve their car's issues, but Lewis Hamilton will have to work a lot harder to adapt to whatever car Mercedes provides him.
Definitely, because not only is Mercedes losing out on points because of the Lewis Hamilton, which is insane, but Lewis Hamilton is essentially not performing at par. He should be the one setting the benchmark, like Sebastian Vettel should have been the one setting the benchmark at Ferrari, and he's the one struggling. And it's just really hard to see that happen. And we saw Lewis Hamilton couldn't get past Pierre Gasly for forever. I'm not sure how they ended up at the end of the race, because I did fall asleep on the last lap. But it was just painful to see that Mercedes in the hands of Lewis Hamilton, not in the hands of Valtteri Bottas, not in another rookie's hand, in the hands of Lewis Hamilton, could not make it past Pierre Gasly on one of the longest straights on the calendar.
Yeah, well, Lewis Hamilton's trouble with AlphaTauri are long journal. Last year also we saw Yuki Tsunoda several times block Lewis Hamilton for position.
But it was McLaren that was the real rival to Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the AlphaTauri Lewis Hamilton situation has been going on for a while. But yeah, it's really surprising. And when a driver is on their peak and when a driver is winning, the positive motivation keeps on going on. When Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, who had a disappointing end to the season and wanted to go for his 8th title this year, is not scoring points, what does it do to his mental state? What does it do to his motivation? And he's at an age where one might think about retiring or moving away from the sport, and all these things come into play. But right now, yeah, absolutely, it's high time for Mercedes. And
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people have come out and said that Lewis is not motivated, and it does seem like that in the press conferences. In the media pen, when he comes and does interviews and things like that, he seems like he's low on energy, which is fair. He's trying to put everything that he can into the team, into the car. But I think George Russell and Toto Wolff have come out and said that Lewis has been giving his entire support. He's very dedicated to the program still, and I don't think Lewis is going anywhere anytime soon, because this is a great project for him if you really think about it. He came into the team. It was a championship winning team from the get-go, and now he has a chance to rebuild it. And I think that's a challenge that might just keep Lewis longer in the sport than otherwise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that he may be thinking about moving away or he does not have the motivation, but it's just these are factors. Even if he has one bad weekend, and even if he thinks about these things for one weekend, it is a factor which might affect his performance for that particular weekend. But yeah.
I mean, it's definitely speculation,
Yeah,
and people have been talking, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how it pans out for Lewis Hamilton. But one thing that I want to pick up on that George Russell said in the post-race interview is that the porpoising effect will not be sustainable for drivers, and he complained about having chest and back pains at the end of the weekend. Now, this is something that we had been speculating, but we were surprised that we didn't hear more from the drivers, because Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz said that we have a great car, and porpoising does not matter as long as we continue to win. And it seemed that that is what was shadowing the physical effects of porpoising for the drivers, in the front of the grid. But like we suspected, it's going to have some physiological effects on the drivers. And it'll be interesting to see what the long-term effects are, because we've seen in MotoGP with the development of the bikes, the arm pump has become a huge issue for riders, and it has often taken them out of races, out of seasons, and things like that. So hopefully that is not the case with porpoising, and either the teams can resolve it for the drivers, or the FIA intervenes maybe. But it's too early to still make a knee-jerk reaction to this particular complaint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, this was, performance or not otherwise, the physical state that the drivers are driving in was one of the key factors when you talk about porpoising. And if it's not sustainable, if it's not, if the drivers can't go till the end of the season with this, there needs to be some sort of change. Obviously, the teams are working hard, but if there's no result in view, the FIA will have to step in, because you can't have drivers complaining about their driving conditions.
You say that, but yeah, you say that, but the riders in MotoGP have complained about arm pump for years now, quite a few years now, and there's nothing that has happened to reduce potentially the effect of riding that bike and ending up with the arm pump issue.
Yeah.
So the sport can be pretty unforgiving at times because of how it is. But it'll be interesting to hear more about it as time goes on, and maybe it'll be nice to hear from one of the physiotherapists who are with the team, or the performance coaches who work with these drivers, as to what they think about it and how they are trying to encounter this issue with the drivers, whether that's through physical fitness or some other avenues that they're pursuing. So definitely something to look out for. But let's move on. Let's talk about McLaren. Lando Norris got that podium on pace. Obviously, Charles Leclerc made that mistake, but that was on pace. George Russell was nowhere near him. But I think the bigger win for McLaren out of this weekend is Daniel Ricciardo. Now, in my opinion, Daniel Ricciardo seemed way more confident than he has in that McLaren team this weekend. And I want to point out one particular incident that happened over the weekend. Sprint race. I think Daniel Ricciardo went on a move into Tamburello chicane on Kevin Magnussen, and we saw the signature Daniel Ricciardo late dive on the brakes. We haven't seen that from Daniel Ricciardo since last year, basically, since joining McLaren. And that goes to show that, Daniel Ricciardo is feeling the car way better than he has so far. And there's great things to come for McLaren as long as they can, continue with their development, which has been great, which looks like it wasn't a circuit-specific thing coming from Australia to Imola.
Yeah, absolutely. Two different sorts of circuit, two different conditions in driving conditions, and their braking issues and their early woes have been eliminated or reduced. And as you said, Lando Norris was finishing P4 without Charles Leclerc spinning out. So great result. Obviously, who knows where Daniel Ricciardo could have ended up in the Grand Prix. But yeah, if he made that move, because we know from last year and the winter break, his preparation during the winter break and his interviews after that he was really struggling with braking, and he was really struggling with rotating that car. So if he can make that late dive lunge and rotate that car under braking, then it's definitely coming back to him in a very, very proper way.
Absolutely. And the other team to have a big dub this weekend was obviously Aston Martin, double points finish. And I think the bigger win for them there was Sebastian Vettel in that car. He finally, it seemed, was able to make that car work throughout the weekend, in the wet conditions and in the dry conditions, in qualifying, in the sprint, and during the feature race on Sunday. So I think that was a huge dub for not just Aston Martin, but for all of us to see Sebastian Vettel back in the points and not struggling at the back of the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sebastian Vettel loves the rain, loves the tricky conditions. not in Germany, but otherwise, especially in Italy, especially in
Pain.
Italy. His first win, first pole position came in a wet Monza, and now he scores his first points of the season. And Australia was a write-off. He didn't race for two races, if the first two races, and coming to Imola, scoring points, leading the team for a double points finish. Brilliant.
And yeah, and now all 10 teams have a point on the board, and Williams is somehow 10th once again. Uh,
Who expected that?
it's interesting, yeah, it's interesting though. It's definitely interesting that even the lower midfield of Aston Martin, Williams, and whoever may be there next
Yeah.
week, it's all rotating around. You can still expect Aston Martin to be in the points. You can still expect Williams to be in the points. So there, you can't write off the season for any of the teams that are on the grid at the moment, especially with all the reliability issues and with these unexpected performances so far. But coming back to the issue at hand, Vedan, I think the biggest question still remains: how do you feel about the sprint?
Well, see, I think it's the same question and the same answer every time.
Because the sprint race was really interesting this weekend. Does that change anything for you?
See, it's the bottom line is it's racing. It's interesting, right? Any racing is interesting if there are overtakes, there is action. It's interesting. Is it needed? I would say no. Is it necessary? Should Formula One promote it even more? I would say no. Is it harming the sport, or is it harming the image or the spectacle? I would say no. So, like, it's one of those things, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So they didn't need to add it, but now, since it is there's no valid reason to remove it as such. You know what I mean. But
Yeah.
I think the top 8 points, the giving points to the top 8 drivers was a very healthy inclusion in this, and the adjustment to the cost cap was a very healthy adjustment in the regulations. But yeah, I mean, so far so good, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what the financial benefit is to Formula One through the sprint race, or to the promoters exactly, but it doesn't really do much for me.
Exactly.
I would, because it. A lot of people have argued that what the sprint races does is, like, we had an unexpected qualifying in Imola on Friday because of the conditions, and then it basically somewhat gave a chance to the drivers who are out of place to get back into place. For example, Carlos Sainz, right? He started 10th and he ended up 4th, and that's where he started on Sunday. So that is there, but it really doesn't add anything to the weekend for me. If anything, it makes it hard for me to see the qualifying session.
Yeah.
So for me, it's still, I don't really care for the sprint. If it helps out Formula One, if it helps out the sport, then that's great. But you could do away with the sprint, and I wouldn't bat an eye.
Yeah, I mean,
It's basically where I fall.
qualifying on Friday is only good for the Europeans who can go home and watch it, whatever time that may be. But other
Yeah.
than that, at home I was at work when qualifying was happening. You were obviously asleep when qualifying was happening. So, I mean, since it's a Friday, it's very difficult for people to watch it. But whatever, I think the F1 did attract that the Crypto.com sprint thing, so they got a title sponsor
Yep.
for that sprint event. So that may be the financial benefit they were gathering, and they could sell more tickets for a Saturday and for a Friday as well. So those are the two things. But in terms of the spectacle, for a overall broader view, it doesn't change anything. Should the sprint be there or not be there?
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. We're getting towards the end of the podcast now. One other person who needs to step up is Mick Schumacher. Kevin Magnussen has had a scintillating few weekends in that Haas car, but Mick Schumacher is nowhere near his teammate, which goes to show the performance gap once again, just in the case of Russell and Hamilton, that exists. Mick really needs to step up. Haas could be backing some insane points here if Mick were to finish in the top 10 consistently as Magnussen is, and similarly it goes for Guan Yu Zhou, who needs to finish next to Valtteri Bottas, who's been doing a fantastic job in that Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, I mean, watching Valtteri Bottas drive on Sunday was brilliant. You could see the Valtteri Bottas of Williams, which Mercedes hired basically. So it's great to see, but again, it's Guan Yu Zhou's first season,
Rookie season.
and the fundamentals of these cars are much different from the Formula 2 cars, So I think it's going to take some time, but definitely they need to step up because the performance is there, because the cars are capable of scoring points and being competitive. Even, we saw Kevin Magnussen put it P4 in qualifying. So that should give them enough motivation and enough hunger basically to start getting those points.
Yeah, I don't know what it is with the Haas setup. I don't know if they're chasing a qualifying setup, but they seem to qualify really well and then drop off during the race. So hopefully they'll be able to figure that out. One last thing that you put in the notes, Vedant, it seems you're very happy about Cooldown Rooms being back. I don't care about that.
Yeah, I mean,
at all.
I don't care about
I would rather not have Cooldown Rooms because it seems cool. I mean, obviously Cooldown Rooms can promote some drama, but as someone who does not like a lot of conflict, I would rather not have them.
Yeah, I just wrote that because while I was writing the notes, I saw a image of the cooldown room, so I wrote that down. But imagine cooldown rooms in 2021. That would have been like 2016, right? So, I mean, it's whatever you like. I didn't watch the cooldown room event because I did not know there were cooldown rooms. So as soon as the race ended, I switched it off. But yeah, who knows? We might see some insane drama or some event, whatever.
We might see an incident.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's all from my side. Without anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap up this podcast?
Well, nothing else. I just, I wrote down in my notes that Alpine's pursuit for performance over reliability is going to cost them a lot of points, which we saw this weekend. But I mean, so far so good. They are not really struggling. Esteban Ocon has 20 points from 4 races. So far so good. But I don't think it's sustainable in the long run. Let's see how that goes.
Yup, let's see how that goes. The championship is wide open. Thank you, Vedant, for joining me. It's been a pleasure talking F1 with you. And obviously, we'll catch you on the next one.